ago, I got curious about my DNA. What's inside that people can't see, right? Used to be, you had to do a lot of genealogical research, digging through dusty archives and courthouse basements to find out about your family heritage, which is what we called DNA before we had the science of genetics. Now, however, you can just go online and pay to get a little kit. You can spit in a tube and send it in, and they email you back a report about where your folks, back not all the way to the beginning, but back quite a ways to where your ancestors came from, which provides some insights into your identity, what sort of human you are, and perhaps into who you are related to. What I found out is that my human heritage is very Northern European. The report said that 72% of my DNA, my biological heritage, is from Ireland. Another 8% is from Scandinavia, 7% from Great Britain, Italy and Greece 3%, Eastern Europe, and a few other locations, each 1% or less. I always knew that I was at least half Irish, the half on my father's side, since those family members always talked about being full-blood Irish, whatever that means. But I did not expect that as much as 80% would be from Ireland and England. All told, there's a lot of Northern European in my background and not much from any other region. My racial category is what we call white. Although, as science has demonstrated, Homo sapiens actually originated in a single place in Africa, so all humans share a singular fundamental heritage, if you look back far enough in evolution. And yet I know from my experience and from my education and from reading Tandeka's book, Learning to be White, that the identity of white is in no way an automatic or instinctual ascription. I understand that my racial identity, like my gender identity and a variety of other descriptors, are to a great extent socially ascribed. Even though we're born with certain genes, certain physical characteristics, our identity labels and their meanings are learned as part of our socialization, the process by which we learn the rules for living in our family, our community, and society. And as I've said from this pulpit before, at the same time as we learn our identity, we learn who we belong to, who is and is not part of our tribe. Our genetic and cultural heritage is a crucial part of knowing who we are. As I was growing up, the identity of New York Irish American was emblazoned on my psyche. I still have all the shamrocks in the spring. I was part of a tribe, and there were stories and celebrations to support that. As I got older, I learned that my father's family had been, as was common at the time, staunchly anti-Italian. Now, don't take this personally, anybody. So much so that my aunt was deterred from marrying a man she loved, as he was deemed unacceptable because of his ethnic heritage. There were other identity clashes in the family system, as my mother, who was a Southwest Missouri farm girl, was also deemed unworthy by my father's New York Irish family, and so she was often the brunt of subtle and not so subtle snubs about her background as a country bumpkin. My relatives defined who they were in part by defining who was not really part of their tribe. But the definitions and the boundaries as social constructs can change over time, so that by the time I was growing up in a suburban neighborhood north of New York City, our Italian neighbors were apparently accepted as our social equals, bound together perhaps by being white, not black or brown or red or yellow, in the common shorthand for the variety of ethnic identities in our nation and the world. Even as our identity classifications have continued to shift and evolve around national or regional orientation, national or regional origin, we are experiencing a gradual expansion of understanding in the society about all the many ways of being human, all the identities among us, both those that are evident and those hidden from view. The progress is slow and often uneven, but I'm among those who believe that progress is not only possible, but inevitable, and that the turbulence in our society today is actually an artifact of that process of transformation, the tension between change and resistance. We live in a world on the brink of new understandings. I believe that this is a threshold time, a time when an old tribal way of being human is struggling to survive, and that what we are seeing is the death throes of that old way. even as a new way of being human is rising with power, making its way into the light and the air, ushering in a new age of hope and possibility. These are times that challenge us also into new ways of being, discarding our comfortable and well-worn assumptions about ourselves and others as we move into new perceptions and understandings. We do well to remember that a time of crisis can also be a time of hope. Our response to crisis and challenge is a choice. We can respond with retreat and despair, or we can allow ourselves to be transformed, mobilized into a new perception, lifted into action, open to a new way of living and loving into our human possibility. We begin by being open to the possibility of something new. Physicist Fritjof Capra said, quote, "Any crisis is essentially a crisis of perception. It derives from the fact that we are trying to apply the concept of an outdated worldview, the mechanistic worldview of science, to a reality that can no longer be understood in terms of those concepts. We live today," he said, "in a globally interconnected world in which biological, psychological, social, and environmental phenomena are all interdependent," end quote. Part of Capra's thesis is that both the universe and our human essence, human nature itself, are transforming as we continue human evolution from Homo sapiens into Homo noeticus, an entirely new species of humanity. And where we are now is the in-between time, the unsettling, uncomfortable, challenging, exciting zone of possibility between sapiens and noeticus, between two entirely different ways of being. Anthropologist Pamela Peck suggests that, quote, "The future of humankind depends on two critical elements. First, an ability to transcend ideology and recognize the oneness of the human species, and secondly, a greatly enhanced appreciation of planet Earth." Peck continues, "In other words, our intellectual impulse must be matched by what might be called a religious impulse. By religious," she says, "I do not mean a system of beliefs and dogmas and rituals. I mean precisely those two elements mentioned above, a mind that can transcend ideology and recognize the oneness of the human species, and a mind that has an acute appreciation of the planet," end quote. You probably will have noticed that Peck's view of the religious impulse closely matches our Unitarian Universalist way of being religious. And so I look in this challenging time for signs of hope, the tender emergence of new growth that struggles or sings to the surface within us as we balance on the brink, as we move across the threshold into something new. An important part of our human evolution is the emergence from binary thinking into non-binary, from binary into non-binary, moving into inclusive, expansive thinking, expansive in our beliefs about race, about ethnicity, about gender and other identities, and about how we build value-centered and welcoming religious community, a faith for our time, and how we engage in and share the journey of change. Science has known for a long time now that reality is not binary. Binary thinking is part of an old way of being human, a view of the world that has clearly divided categories in which if something is one way, it cannot be another. Binary thinking leads to limited perceptions, with what author Daniel Priestley calls, quote, "the categories of right, wrong, yes, no, good, bad." Binary thinking feels safe. It creates a world where things are black or white. They are happening or not happening. Something is good or it's bad. Things happen sequentially in a binary world, in a linear, orderly fashion. The largest and most powerful part of your brain loves the idea that this is how the world works. It craves the clarity of a world that unfolds in a straight line, end quote. But the reality of the universe, the intersection of space and time and quantum reality, is definitely non-binary. We know, for example, that the building blocks of all existence, the electrons in atoms, are not particles or waves, but both at the same time. Matter and energy constantly transforming. the fundamental structure of the universe is non-binary. Applying that binary thinking to the reality of race, a binary thinker goes to categories of white, not white. For national origin, to categories of American or foreign. For human gender, a binary thinker would say that a person is either male or female, period. This is what we may have been taught, certainly what I was taught when I was young. Binary definitions are basic to so many of the ways our society is set up. It's reflected in so many of the laws and resources and structures we encounter every day. Binary thinking may be comfortable for us, yes, but is binary reality true? Not so much. Binary definitions of human ways of being, I now understand, do not correspond to our complete human reality, to the way our outsides and our insides match or fail to match. And they're contrary to the principles, the mission, and the vision to which we are committed. Real truth in physics and chemistry and in human life is non-binary, inclusive, expansive, diverse, and changing. Otherwise, it's not really truth. Binary thinking has done immeasurable harm in our world, especially in human relationships. In October 1998, Matthew Shepard was tortured and left to die. A young gay man killed by other young men he knew, killed because of his identity. Matthew was brutally murdered by people trapped in their binary worldview about gender identity and expression. So many deaths, so much suffering, so much exclusion, so much disrespect. There was a report in recent years about a transgender middle school student who was separated from her peers during a safety drill and made to wait in the hall while her peers took shelter in restrooms because school officials could not decide which restroom the student could take shelter in. Fixed categories of male and female created isolation and possible danger for this student because of binary thinking about gender. The Human Rights Campaign reports that, quote, the epidemic of violence against transgender people is an urgent crisis that demands the nation's immediate attention. It is crucial that we combat the transphobia, misogyny, and racism fueling this violence so that we can end this epidemic before it takes any more lives, end quote. This week, we celebrated the annual observance of National Coming Out Day, a focal point to respect and affirm the power and presence of gender expansiveness in this nation as the evolution continues into a non-binary understanding of human reality. Gender identity and expression now include, but are not limited to, LGBTQIAA, lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, and ally. In fact, one source now identifies more than 63 different forms of gender identity and expression, defining gender as, quote, the range of characteristics pertaining to and differentiating between masculinity and femininity. Depending on the context, these characteristics may include biological sex, sex-based social structures, including gender roles, and gender identity. Yes, we are widely various in gender identity and expression, both within as well as among ourselves. We are even more amazing than we know. We continue to challenge the old paradigms with which so many of us grew up. The holiday created to honor Christopher Columbus is becoming more widely known as Indigenous Peoples Day in recognition of the devastation and destruction of indigenous societies on this continent and around the world by European invasion and conquest. Hispanic Heritage Month, which dates back to the late 1960s, was created to celebrate a shared identity from those from the southern half of this hemisphere. This identity category has now come under sharp critique by a new generation of activists who charge that it is another example of simplistic binary thinking, ignoring the diversity among people who share a language and a legacy of European colonialism, erasing Black and Indigenous experience. And so we continue to deepen our understandings and to grapple with the ambiguity and complexity of human reality. We gain a deeper appreciation of the realities of living as a human in this diverse and interconnected world. This is part of the work that is set before us as a people of liberal religion in this time, religion in its best sense of opening us to our clearest thinking and our most heart-centered work. We must accept that limited and binary expectations around identity limit our capacity to engage all of human reality. Once again, I quote the words of Adrienne Marie Brown: "Things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered, and we must hold each other tight and continue to pull back the veil." There are many questions for us as we engage with these new understandings. How do we support the full expression and acceptance of identity in all those who enter here, especially for those who are so often excluded, those who are at highest risk for disrespect and danger in our society? How do we create a welcoming environment for discovery, disclosure, and expression for each of us to live openly with acceptance into our entire being, our personal truth? How do we honor each person's being and their becoming, hearing their voice and offering community of love and acceptance? One thing that is clear to me is that there is no one answer, no one opinion. We are called to continue to listen with open minds and open hearts, and to provide a space where the spirit of Homo Noeticus may emerge. As we remain open to seeing reality in new ways, one thing we can do is join in sorrow and remembrance for lives endangered and lost in a world where identity can be deadly. On the evening of Tuesday, November 19th, we will celebrate here the Transgender Day of Remembrance, honoring those who have borne the hardest burden of their identity. All of us, no matter what our identity, have all learned so deeply the lessons of privilege and power, and so we acknowledge that we have much to unlearn and relearn on this path to greater justice for all people of all identities. It is up to us to open our minds, our hearts, and our intention to the learning, to acknowledge the pain we encounter there, and to move forward into a future of greater possibility. That is our call as a movement of faith, as a people of goodwill, and I trust that we will find the courage to answer the call of love, to join hearts and hands in this work that will take us into a new future of possibility. And so I invite you now to rise, embody your spirit, to lift our voices and sing together, answering the call of love. The words and music are in your order service. This is an anthem to the deep work we do in this faith movement and community together.